Welcome to Vertiva's Let's Talk Roadmap Rundown, the show where we talk through the latest updates, enhancements, and features coming soon to Microsoft 365. It's Tuesday, June 25th. I'm Scott Ledwan with Holly Peterson, and on this week's edition of the Roadmap Rundown, we're talking about Teams and Classic Outlook retirement updates, the ability to hide the Discover feed in Microsoft Teams, news around web link updates coming to the new Microsoft Outlook experience, and co-authoring in SharePoint pages. Before we get into the news for the week, we'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to hit those like, subscribe, and share buttons to help our channel grow and get these news and announcements out to more people. So yeah, we're finally here, Holly. It's taken some time. It's been a long road, I feel like, since March of last year when the new version of Microsoft Teams started rolling out. Message Center MC 803-890. It's officially official, as Ian Rappaport would say when delivering the sports news, is the classic version of Teams is finally about to hit its end of support window. That's going to hit on July 1st, which is only about a week away from the recording of this.
Godspeed, classic Teams.
Yeah, so we're going to end up seeing the classic version of Teams is just basically out of support, and we are going to finally see the new tag on the bottom or the top left corner and the icon of the new Microsoft Teams experience go away. It's just Teams now. So there's not really a whole lot to know other than, I mean, we've been telling you, I feel like on the show now, and even on the Let's Talk podcast for months, that this is coming. This is really just a quick FYI to let everyone know that, hey, it's going to change. So starting mid-July, you're just not going to see that new button there. I feel like in Microsoft's case, they had a good opportunity to, make the Teams logo look like something new when they did this change, but they're just taking the new off of it. So maybe we'll get an update again down the line. Any thoughts on what organizations need to do prepare for it, Holly? I mean, they should be prepared for this already at this point, right?
So yeah, the new Teams toggle, the switch, has been visible for a long time, but I know from experience leading training that people have been a little afraid to flip that switch. We've talked about it previously, why you shouldn't be afraid to flip the switch. In fact, hopefully many people have long since started using the new Teams. But this is not only just a good time to continue to remind you, Microsoft is going to continue to remind you, and the Message Center also sends you reminders of big changes that'll impact people. So one of the things that could happen when Microsoft kind of quietly takes away that new flag is people could potentially wonder if the new Teams has gone away. And it's always a good time to remind people that the new Teams is just becoming Teams. So new Teams isn't going away. It is just going to be the Teams experience, and Teams Classic is it's going to the big Teams deprecation bin in the sky, I guess. So now new Teams is just Teams.
And I think an important piece to include in this too, and it gets called out in the post, is right here, is that starting July 1st, the classic team will become unsupported. However, you can still run it. So there's probably some organizations out there that maybe there's an app dependency or there's a specific reason or a hardware requirement that they can't upgrade to the new version of Teams. It is still technically there. And you have, starting July 1st, 2025, Classic Teams Desktop will reach end of availability. So you can still technically use the classic version for another year. Though at this point, I wouldn't recommend it just due to the fact that it's out of support. So if anything goes wrong with it, you can't reach out to Microsoft for any help on it. So I think for 99% of users it's time to switch if you haven't already. And I acknowledge that most folks probably have at this point. But yeah, it's just be ready for it. Again, I'll link everything as we always do in the show notes so you can dig into it a little bit more, but just be aware that it's going away and it's time to say goodbye. So au revoir, Teams.
Bye, Teams. Classic Teams.
Classic Teams. Next one up, we're going to stick with the retirement news and announcements, is Message Center MC 803006. Outlook for Windows display name change. So I spent some time on the show last week talking about this, and it should be no surprise, again, very similar to the team's retirement, is that we've been talking about this for a while, is that some of these apps are starting to move along. Outlook is moving along at a little bit of a slower pace than Teams. But with the introduction of the new Outlook client to general availability, again, we talked about it last week on the show, is we are going to see a differentiation between the classic or the vanilla version of Outlook that most people are used to using and the new version, in that we're going to see the classic label or in parens get put next to the app. So when you go to your start menu or your desktop app, as you can tell, hey, am I about to launch the new version of Outlook? Hey, am I about to launch the old version of Outlook? Which is also interesting too, because if you're launching the classic version of Outlook today and you've never used the new version, or your organization, maybe they have it turned off so that you can't
Yeah.
actually go in and use it, is that might be a little bit of a throw to some people, is, well, why does Outlook say classic now?
Yeah.
But it's just a quick update that's going to happen. There's not going to be any usability or functionality changes to it. So current channel is going to see this starting to roll out in July, so next month to early August, so fairly soon. Monthly enterprise channel September, and then semi-annual get this update next year, which again, kind of, I feel like, ties into the retirement timeline, which I shared this
Mm-hmm.
on the show last week, is when we kind of scroll down. Oh boy, and they've actually updated this again since last week. There's less screenshots in it now. But if we kind of come down to this image here, as we can see, here's this general availability where we are. By the time we hit September, I feel like that's going to be the part where it starts to become the notice of disruptive change announcement might start to hit.
Mm-hmm.
So I talked about a little bit last week about how the speculation is that Classic Outlook will exist until 2029. I have a feeling that feature support will continue through 2027 to a degree, because again, they're going to try and pump as many new
Right.
features into the new Outlook rather than
Yep.
the old version, unless it's Copilot related at this point, right? But as the features kind of start to, become less additive over there, there's just going to be more and more of a reason to switch to the
Yep.
newer version of Outlook. So again, I don't think that it's time to throw all your cards on the table and say we're going all in on the new Outlook yet, just because, I mean, like I was talking to Chris about this last week, is the fee. I tried to send a Word document directly to Outlook. I was creating this long Word document. I was like, oh, I have
Yep.
to share this as an attachment. And I got a pop-up that said, can't do that in the new Outlook yet. And I'm like, well, that's a
Yep.
real head scratcher. But that feature is coming in the summertime. But
Right.
again, just more things to be aware of. Holly, anything else you want to add
Mm-hmm.
specifically on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I will say this. When New Outlook first came on the scene, the difference in features was like really felt night and day, right? It was very, very different. That gap continues to close. It's not closed yet. It's certainly not closed yet. There's a lot of things that you can do in classic Outlook that is a feature that's not yet available in the new Outlook. But it is closing. Microsoft is not done working on the new Outlook. They're bringing, every month it feels like something I couldn't do in the new Outlook is coming soon, or it's on the roadmap. So look over those next 2 years for these to become more in alignment. Now, one thing I will say, we're just talking about a simple name change. The thing that I would recommend every organization to do is to consider that you probably have a mix now of people in your organization, some that have switched on to the new Outlook and others that are still using Outlook Classic. So continue to communicate to everyone. Don't let people kind of bury their head in the sand on this. Ensure that they understand that this change is not catastrophic and imminent, but it's something to start planning for. And continue to test in the new Outlook. Make sure you have pilot groups in the new Outlook. Even if they test it for 2 weeks and turn it right back off, it's always good for you to know where your organization is at as far as readiness.
And I think that the next two things to highlight up here too on it just are, so you're going to get notice of disruptive change. Customers are going to receive a minimum of a 12-month notice before the opt-out begins. That could be coming as soon as September. And that's something that administrators need to be aware of. And then once we hit opt out, after that opt out period happens, customers are going to receive a minimum of 12-month notice before the cutover begins. And that's going to be, hey, here we go. So within like these next 12 to 18 months, probably is going to be that key crucial time for your organization to do testing and provide feedback to Microsoft before they start to switch everyone over
Right.
a little bit more heavy-handedly and forcibly to the new
Right.
version. So it's coming whether we like it or not. At Vertivo, we try to adopt change early and often so that we're ahead of the times, and so we can also provide training and support around it. But your organization is going to need to be ready for this because it is going to happen.
Right. And again, it's not going to happen as fast. Scott and I were discussing before the show how quickly this process happened with Teams. It took just a little over a year,
Yep.
and the new Teams became Teams. Outlook is definitely going to be slower. So I don't want anyone to worry that like Outlook is going away tomorrow, classic Outlook. But it will happen, as Scott said, it will happen. So start thinking about it now. Don't wait until that second green dot on the timeline before you start planning for
Yep.
change. All
Right.
right. So our next message in the message center, MC 803-893, we now have a new setting in Teams to show or hide the Discover feed. So if you go into your Teams settings under the general area of your Teams settings, you can turn the Discover feed on or off. So if any of you have been using Teams or you're supporting end users that use Teams and they're curious and they're saying, what is the Discover feed? This is really just anything that could be relevant to you, new activity across teams and things that are happening that is just kind of an actionable space for you. However, like the activity feed, the Discover feed really could be something that's more or less useful, depending on how you work in Teams. So Microsoft is now giving us a way, and Microsoft, I like to say, when it comes to your personal preferences in Office, Outlook, Teams, whatever, you can really craft your world, your ecosystem. So now they're giving us another way to customize that and have that on or off. So I won't say whether mine is on or off, but I will say I'm glad to have this feature here.
Well, I mean, Holly, you can say if it's on or off because they didn't give us a choice of opting in or out of it at the beginning. And I mean, I would have been okay with them turning it on by default so that folks could get used to it, but I think preferably I would have liked to see this have an opt-out feature when it came
Mhm.
out immediately. But again, just so folks are aware, this will be rolling out late July and then should be globally available by mid-August.
Yeah.
This is a good change for Teams. I think that there's some people out there that are going to like using Discover and probably use it every day today since it rolled out.
Yep.
And then there's going to be others like me who just I'm very old school. I like to just kind of go through my activity feed, go through my
Right.
team, see where stuff's lit up and find that stuff that way. Like I don't find it completely unuseful, but I find that sometimes the way that the algorithm is sorting what's at the
Right.
top of that list isn't always what's most important to me. It's kind of
Right.
like a focused inbox for Teams right now.
You
Um,
read my mind.
which I mean, Holly, we've had discussions around my use of focus inbox and in Outlook, and I just it's not for me. It's for some
The
people.
thing. I love focused inbox. I love it. I'm like, where has this been all my life? But it really comes down to this. Focused inbox, Discover feed, any one of these features, Microsoft is really good at coming up with feature sets that people really appreciate and others just kind of question mark it. What works for you might not be something that works for the person who sits next to you. And the nice thing is Microsoft is going to give us a choice. So I can't imagine what it would be like if focused inbox was a non-turn off feature, because I know a lot for someone like me who loves it, there's plenty of people who don't love it. So this is kind of like Microsoft coming back to being Microsoft and saying, hey, we have this super helpful feature. If you want to use it and you love it, leave it on. If it's not for you, you can turn it off.
Holly, you did such a great job setting up the last one. And that was the first time that you've ever set one up. So claps.
Yeah.
I'm going to let you set up the next one too.
Yeah, so the next one we have Message Center 803892. This is behavior in Outlook where when you click a web link in Outlook for Windows, meaning the installed version of Outlook, it's going to open that message side by side in Microsoft Edge with the displayed web content. So this is something that Microsoft you may have noticed is already doing in Teams. So if you haven't gone in and edited your files and links settings in Teams, you'll notice that when someone sends you a web link in a Teams message and you click it, it just takes you to Edge and opens up the message and the web content side by side. So this behavior is now coming to Outlook. I think this is one of those things where, again, you can
coming to the new
change.
Outlook.
Oh yes,
The new Outlook. Microsoft
the
again
new
is trying to
Outlook.
find a way to push you into the new version.
So it's one of those things where I find it, again, each person is going to have their own way that they like this or don't like it. I know some people that are just die hard devoted to a particular browser and would always shun Edge. It just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it does. But I'm finding that Edge is popping up in a lot of other places in Microsoft 365, not necessarily to be pesky, but to continue to remind us how deeply it is integrated into Microsoft 365. I think for a while, I knew that organizational search was part of it. I kind of like knew it, but now I'm really starting to see its usefulness. So if you want to be able to take advantage of this, again, that's coming soon. And that is going to be rolling out late in July for the new Outlook.
With everything going on in the EU right now, in terms of not just Microsoft, but all tech companies and antitrust, and this feature being specific to Edge only makes me wonder if Microsoft will have to give up some ground on that at some point and allow it to open
Could
in
be,
a
could
Chrome or a
be.
Firefox. I mean, if you've ever not had Edge as your default browser, you have seen the pop-ups and how intrusive they can be to get you to try it out because it's better than Chrome or better than Firefox.
Yep.
And we'll see on this one. If you're using Edge as a day-to-day, I think this is good. I've been seeing it pop up in Teams for quite some time now.
Yep.
And while at first I was a little bit resistant to it because I didn't really like it taking up the extra screen real estate, I have started to come around on it more and more in Teams. So I think that
Yeah.
it'll be interesting to see how this starts to work more in Outlook. So you'll be able to see side by side your message with the related content that you clicked on
Right.
from it.
I want to even say that Edge, as far as kind of its usefulness within, being able to search the web and your organizational content at the same time, being
Yep.
able to have Teams and Outlook loaded in the sidebar with your browser. I'm just really interested to see where this all goes. I think you're right that with, everything that goes on in the EU, Microsoft often gets their hand slapped on, how much it only lets you use its own tools. So those sorts of things like Teams becoming kind of unbundled from Microsoft 365 in a way. Those are things that happen, but I will say for me, just taking it on the surface as a convenience, I quite like it. Only because it allows me to have my email and the web content side by side. So I never really lose context of either thing.
Yep. Absolutely. And certainly not just a Microsoft thing either. For anyone that's been following the show or just the news in general, is Apple is having to put like the new iOS 18 features on hold, the screen sharing and the Apple Intelligence stuff, all that stuff's getting delayed until next year. And I know Zuckerberg is complaining about how restrictive the EU's content policies are on Facebook as
Yep.
well, and Meta, because they can't do half the stuff that they do in the US in Europe because of how restrictive the content policies have gotten. I think even
Right.
Facebook News is being limited, or maybe that's Google News that's limited in Canada. Like they can't put it up in Canada for some reason. Like everyone is starting to. we've had this conversation. I know I've talked to Chris about it too, and we've talked about it before on the show, is that we're becoming a much more AI and tech regulated world, except for if you live in the United States,
Yep.
where it's just kind of the Wild West still. But I gotta think that at some point in the next year or so, we're gonna start to see more regulations on AI
Right.
and privacy starting to come into play here.
I
So,
feel like Microsoft has already started anticipating changes in these environments with how much security focus they've been
yep,
doing. I feel like it's always sort of like, they are kind of saying we'll never sacrifice security and things like that. And it's almost like they're a few steps ahead of every organization that's starting to understand the security impacts of using AI and other intelligent features. So I think that it's a good thing, although it's really funny. I mean, I, I mean, every company is doing AI, but it's sort of like for a company like Microsoft to be the catalyst for the conversation and also trying to solve it
yep,
themselves. It feels responsible with a lowercase r. How about that? Like if you
yes,
cause
for
the
sure.
regulation or the question, right? But it is sort of like interesting that they're sort of saying like, we know we can't just throw this stuff out there into people's laps, that we have to have the security conversation too.
Yep, absolutely. And they're getting there. They're starting to practice what they preach. I think that there's been a lot of noise around Microsoft from a security perspective, even back
Mhm.
in early June with the Windows recall mess, that
Yep.
they are starting to buckle down and get more serious.
Yeah.
My biggest takeaway from the recall mess was they made the security first initiative, then they announced recall, and it's like, did no one from the security team actually look at this before you announced it? Because they lost so much good faith with that announcement, and
Yeah.
they did the right thing pulling it back. But it's like Sideshow Bob. Just every time he turns, he steps on a rake. That's what I
And
feel like
this is,
Microsoft's
I
been
mean,
doing.
look at it. I mean, with AI, there's 1,000 rakes laying on the ground, truly, right?
Yep.
So if we really want to be pushing this, it's got
Well,
to
I mean,
become
heck, too.
more secure
Look
and
at you.
sound.
You have to look at AI. Is AI a product or is AI a feature? And I feel like the direction was it's a product, and now it is starting to lean much more heavily into it's a feature because it's just going to show up in everything that you use, and you're not going to
Right.
have one AI product for it. Um,
Right. And I always temper with the use of Copilot. I know we're kind of veering into another topic of conversation, but I always, always, always think of a time where Teams didn't exist
yep.
in Microsoft 365 and what it was first like when it came out and what it is today. And I know Copilot is going to go through 10 times the development and iterations. So I kind of feel in some ways, although I know I work in the training and development space, but I'm not only trying to teach people how to use these tools, but I'm also along for the ride. Like who knows what they'll become? Who knows how they'll change and morph and become more safe and secure to use? And really, what's happening in the world, right? Because not only is Microsoft dabbling in this new feature, the rumblings around regulation and what you can and can't or shouldn't do with it, these decisions are happening in real time around this. So I'm really interested to see where it goes. I don't have like a doom and gloom feeling about it. I'm incredibly hopeful because I see it's how powerful it can be and how helpful it can be. So I would say, circling back to to Edge is just one of those things where Microsoft is going to continue to kind of put the right things under our nose. And of course, you can always, because it's Microsoft, you can always opt out. You can change your settings, you can change your default link handler back
Yep.
to your preferred browser, but it's not going to stop Microsoft from trying to develop on this platform.
Yep. For sure. All right. Well, that was an excellent episode 21A of our Let's Talk podcast series. I'll turn it into a clip, Holly, just so it exists out there somewhere. But we've got one more message center announcement left for the day, and then we will let everyone go and get on with their day. All right. So the final one up here that we have is Message Center ID MC803012 and Roadmap ID 124853. And that is Microsoft is bringing the ability to collaborate on SharePoint pages and news pages with co-authoring, which seems like it's kind of a
Pretty cool.
no-brainer and something that they should have done long ago. I mean, we've been able to co-author in Word documents and Excel documents, and Loop Components has been fairly fresh and new over the last year or so as that's been rolling out more and more. But starting
Mhm.
in late June, which is now, for targeted release and early and into early August for general availability, is you're going to get a new kind of co-authoring experience in Microsoft SharePoint.
Right.
Huge pluses to this, and Holly, we were talking about it on the pre-show, is that there are still so many people that just use SharePoint as a place to dump their files. And we see it with Teams sites that have SharePoint underlays. We see it with SharePoint sites that just could sit up. We even see it with general just, hey, I need to share files between an organization, but I don't want to put them on my
Yeah.
OneDrive. Like so many people kind of they have and I don't even want to say it's a bad taste in their mouth, just it's more of a familiarity of, hey, I had SharePoint 2010 once, and this is all we did with it was we just
Right.
dumped all of our documents into a folder.
Right.
And where I'm kind of going with this is Microsoft is constantly improving and trying to reinvigorate that SharePoint experience to get people
Right.
more into the mindset of, hey, this can actually be a news site for your organization. This can be an HR landing page for information about company holidays,
Right.
time off, different policies within the organization. Like the SharePoint intranet piece is a big thing that we've pushed in our Microsoft crash courses. And I still talk about it with organizations all the time is, hey, what do you do for internet today? And some people tell me no, some people tell me that they don't do anything. And others say that no, we just don't use SharePoint. What we do is we pay for a third party platform to do this for us. And
Mm.
Microsoft is trying to make it easier and easier for your
Right.
communication and your marketing team to be able to work together on this new co-authoring pages feature. You can really just kind of dip in and work on things together collaboratively.
Right.
I think it's a huge win. And
I
again,
agree.
my mind is a little bit boggled that something like this didn't previously exist for pages and news, but Microsoft is starting to push that piece of their modern work platform forward. Holly, what do you think? This
It's
is definitely good, right?
absolutely. Since its inception, I'm talking about on-premises SharePoint. I think SharePoint has always been not very approachable. It's different. It was hard to create pages. It was hard to manage permissions. And ever since SharePoint Online came on the scene, it's never been so possible to actually work with SharePoint. I say this a lot about on-premises SharePoint and SharePoint Online. Microsoft is really great at changing the names of things or whatever. But for a lot of people, the word SharePoint is like a four-letter word. They don't want to say it, they don't want to deal with it. And the less they feel it exists, they can hide from it, the better. But it's things like this that say like SharePoint is totally it's a distant relative at this point to an on-premises installation. It still has, you can architect your environment the way you want it. But when it comes down to your average office worker being able to make a page, edit a page, publish a page, it's so easy. So I think we're going to continue to see things along this line where hey, we know how to co-edit a Word document together. We know how to co-edit a presentation together. Now we can co-edit a SharePoint page together or a news post. It's it's key. So I'm really excited for this. I wish I could look into a crystal ball 10 years into the future and know if the word SharePoint or the name SharePoint will stick around. Because, like I said, I feel like that name has been a hurdle for some
Yep.
people, but it's important for everyone to know it's totally new. It's a totally new experience, and it's never been easier to work in this environment. And if you're not using SharePoint pages, if you're not coupling your documents with pages, information that's so easy to build and display, like you're really missing out. You're really
Yeah.
missing out, and you're not getting the value of what you pay for your Microsoft 365 licenses.
In Pages too, and News it's a surface level thing. There's so much more that you can do with SharePoint than just News and Pages and storing your files.
Right.
There's workflows, lists. There's so much that you can actually do with it.
It's
And I'm
easy.
hoping that this new co-authoring feature will get more people
Yeah,
to
I
jump into
agree.
the pool on it.
Like I said, this is part of your license. And think about how many organizations we work with that are like, we don't want to use SharePoint. Don't say the word SharePoint. I mean, it's a huge one. It's hard to untangle Microsoft 365 and SharePoint, but it's really one of those things where if your impression of SharePoint is one that you got 15 years ago, go look at it again. You will change your mind. It is so easy to use.
Thanks again for tuning in this week. We will be out next week for the holiday, but excited to come back and talk more about all things Microsoft 365 in July. If there are any announcements today that you want to dig into further, we've made sure to make them all available in the show notes. If your organization is interested in Microsoft 365 or is already using it and you need help with implementing or managing those services, you can contact Vertiva by emailing us at letstalk@vertiva.com or by visiting our website at www.virteva.com. And if you made it this far, don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons to help us out. Thanks and have a great day. Bye all.